So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Again, for whoever feels comfortable putting their camera on, I appreciate it. So it looks like I'm talking to people. We're going to be talking about something called linguistic theft today. And so that's from the book Mama Bear Apologetics, Empowering Your Kids to Challenge Cultural Lies. There are so many things that are going on in our world right now that unless you kind of start to understand the tactics that the enemy's using, sometimes it blindsides you, or you're just going, what's going on? Something's irrational, something's changed, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And so the goal in that book was to really help people see these are the ideas that are seeping into culture. This is what's going on. And so when you see it happening, it doesn't have to be confusing. You can say, oh, okay, I recognize that. There's something really empowering about being able to expect when someone is trying to manipulate you, because there's a lot of manipulation that's going on right now, and a lot of it is around words. So today we're going to talk about linguistic theft. We're going to talk about just the definition. What is it? We're going to talk about how it works. Like, why would someone be using this? What's the purpose of stealing words? Why it's happening. This section is not in the Mama Bear book. This is something that I crafted after we were done with the book that I think really, really explains what Satan's goal is. Like, what is the enemy doing? It says that we are to be aware of the enemy's schemes. And I think that that's going to help explain that. We're going to talk about which words are being stolen and then how to prepare your kids for that. So I'm going to try to toggle back and forth between the PowerPoint. Oh, I need to set my timer. Hold on. Okay, so this makes sure that we leave time for questions. So if I check my watch, it's because I'm seeing how much time we have left. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen right now. Okay, so here we have linguistic theft. I want the screen to be bigger. There we go. Redefine words to get your way and avoid reality. That was actually the title of the chapter in the book. But today we're going to be talking about how culture is using Christian words to promote a secular agenda. So kind of talked about that. So what is linguistic theft? It is refers to the purposefully hijacking of words, changing their definitions, and then using those same words as tools of propaganda. And this is much more sinister than the evolution of language. And so what I'm going to try to do is leave slides up long enough for in case you want to just take a picture of it, and then I'll stop sharing so you can so we can be having our conversation. So the evolution of language is kind of to be expected. So I'm going to give an example. I discovered a dictionary in our library that I had when I was growing up, and I think my dad had it when he was growing up. It's from the 1960s. So I just decided to pick one of my words from the linguistic theft chapter and just say, hey, in the 1960s, what did this mean? And so I picked the word bigot. And the very first definition in the dictionary from 1960 was hilarious. It was a man with a mustache. So you can bet that when my husband decides to grow some kind of lip caterpillar, I'm going to pull that one out and tease him. But so that would be an example of the evolution of language. No one's trying to steal, trying to demonize people with mustaches. It's just not happening. But the word bigot, of course, the definition that you might see other places is to be irrationally and dogmatic about holding to one view and rejecting another one, and kind of like being mean to that other view. That would be a bigot, is someone who just is actually kind of abusive to someone who holds a different view. Well, now it's come to mean what is basically someone who just believes that there is truth. Anyway, so that would be the difference between evolution of language versus linguistic theft. Where's my cursor? Sorry, I'm working between two screens here. So I'm going to share this one so you can take a picture of it real quick if you would like to. You don't have to. So linguistic theft works. And so these are the 5 ways that it works. It stops a discussion in its tracks. So a lot of times if you have a really loaded word, if someone says, what if they say, this person's a racist, and if you support them, you're a racist too. Conversation's kind of over at that point because there's nothing you can say. It's going to stop a discussion in its tracks because basically they've used this really hot button word. It compels people to think or I'm sorry, it compels people to act without thinking through issues. So the words that we talk about in the book are like the word crisis. If someone says that something's a crisis, your first instinct is we need to act quickly, right? This is a crisis. We got to do this quickly. But what they're talking about, they have not actually given you information about what's happening. They've just labeled it something. They've labeled it a crisis, or as someone saying, stop the war on whatever, like, for abortion rights, it's stop the war on women. For apparently, if there's a war against women through abortion or trying to take away abortion, they say, what, do you hate women? Like, my husband has had people say this to him because he does a lot of pro-life apologetics. Like, why do you hate women so much? You're just trying to advocate for a war on women. If the word war has kind of been taken, they know that this is an emotionally laden term, so they use it. Number 3 is it blurs the details. So let's talk a little bit about categorical words versus information words. So an example I want to give that is a church in Florida not too long ago. I saw something on the, hold on, I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay, I saw something on Facebook that was saying, it was this big apology letter from a church pastor who says, we are announcing to the world that we have discovered that in searching for a new pastor, it was a search committee, in searching for our new pastor and in voting for him, racism has entered the conversation. We have people in our church who are blatantly have racist ideologies, and we just want to say, you're right. We found this in our church and we are not going to stand for it. And we apologize to our friends of color, and we are going to take care of this. And I remember reading that and thinking, what happened? Like, what actually happened? Is there any actual information that I was given in that article? No. It was a label. It was a category word. They say these actions were racist. Everybody has an idea of what racism is. So, what people would expect is that it was a Black pastor who had applied. They were trying to confirm him as pastor, and people said, we don't want a Black pastor. That's what they would expect people to mean by saying something was racist. So I decided to keep digging and digging and digging. And what I found was that raise your hand. Did anyone listen? Or I'm not sure when Neil's talking about this. He's talking about critical race theory. Did anyone see that? Or raise your hand if you're just familiar with that term. So we got several of them. Yeah, so critical race theory is basically very anti-biblical. It's saying that there's certain sins that are not redeemable on the cross. We need to, Christ's sacrifice was not sufficient, and we need to continue to be repenting and making up for it. And you don't even have to, have actually done something. If you belong to a specific race, you are automatically guilty of this, and therefore you need to repent as for your color, as your whiteness. That is kind of critical race theory. And so what had actually happened is that the pastor that they were looking into openly advocated for critical race theory. You had people within the church that started saying, oh no, we know that this is against the gospel. This is going to divide us even further. So they kind of went around and they sent emails and they talked to people in the church saying, this is what he teaches. And I don't think we should confirm him as pastor. Now we look at the response. What was the big letter that the search committee set out? We have discovered racism in our ranks. So what that goes with number 3, with it blurs the details. So whenever you hear someone that's given a category word without actual information, you always need to be asking what actually happened. So if someone says assault, we assume that we know what assault is. That doesn't always mean what we think it means. I think Garrison Keillor, he had his career ruined because he was taken, I think one of his staff had been crying and he kind of rubbed her on the back and was like, it's okay. And 10 years later now she says that he assaulted her based on that. There was an unwanted advance. It made her feel uncomfortable. Anything that blurs the details by using a category word, you've probably got linguistic theft going on. Number 4, it vilifies the opposing viewpoint. So we see this happen a lot with, also within the abortion debate, that pro-life people are called forced birthers. It's trying to paint people in the worst way possible. Or if you just think of the phrase pro-choice. what are they choosing? Are they choosing to not the choice to, not wear their seatbelts? Are they choosing what they eat? It's like there is only one specific thing they mean by choice. And anyone who's against us is against people having choice. You're against people's free will. So you're really vilifying the opposing team by hijacking this word and redefining it to mean what you mean. And then finally, it turns a negative into a positive or vice versa. I think of, not that I want to say I have a strong opinion on this, but I just thought it was interesting when we had a flood of people coming through the border. Do y'all remember what they called those? They were dreamers. They're just dreamers. Why are you trying to stop dreamers? It's like they're just trying to fulfill their dream. Usually you would think of dreamers as someone who's just trying to, I don't know, I don't want to go into that, but this is how we're using words in order to basically promote, we want whatever we're saying to be correct, and whatever people, if they disagree, we want to make them look really, really bad for disagreeing. And so the more I go into this, the more I realize that this is a purposeful, it's a purposeful attack on words. Because think about it, what in John 1 is Jesus called? The Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So that right there tells us that if Satan is trying to go against Christ, and Christ is the Word, the Logos, then he's going to be trying to attack words in some way. And so this is kind of my diagram. I'm going to share my screen again of what I think is happening with linguistic theft and why. So we're going to start out with just the basic, man and God right here. The entire story of Scripture is the building the right relationship between man and God. So we've got, let's see, mankind and we've got God that are separated. We are no longer in relationship. And the way that we maintain that relationship is through the gospel. So this is the first goal. This is the purpose of Scripture. Mankind and God, the right relationship between them is caused through the gospel. But also, if you notice, gospel is here in the middle. In order to have the correct definition of the gospel, you have to have the correct, basically, identity of God and of man. So if you don't have the correct identity of man, we'll say man's not sinful or man really is his own God. You cannot have gospel if you skew the identity of man. Well, same thing with God. If God really doesn't care about sin, or if God really isn't loving, you can't have the gospel there either, because he was ultimately just and ultimately righteous for sending his son to die on the cross for us. That is how you get gospel. And if Satan's biggest thing is he is trying to prevent right relationship between man and God, this is what he's going to do. That's what he did in the Garden of Eden. When in the Garden of Eden, he tried to basically change the identity of God. He asked Adam and Eve, or he asked Eve, did God really say, are you sure? It seems like this would actually work out for your benefit. God's not really looking out for you. He's holding back. He doesn't want you to have the same kind of power he does. God is a selfish tyrant. He changed the identity of God. But raise your hand if you've heard the phrase imago Dei. So imago Dei is just that Latin word that means image of God. And so if Satan cannot directly attack the identity of God, who do you think he's going to go after next? The identity of man. And this is one of the things that we're seeing happen right now. I mean, with the whole gender thing, Scotland just there was an article recently in Salvo magazine about how Scotland just recently had something between like 17 and 23 genders on their formal census for the nation. This idea that people do not know what male and female are anymore. And it says in Genesis, he made them in his image, the imago Dei, male and female, he created them. So again, if we're trying to go against the identity of God, can't do it. Okay, well, we're going to start working on the identity of man because he reflects God. Once you have knocked these two things out, guess what? You can't have gospel. And that's what he was going towards in the beginning. Now, I want to focus on this word here, identity, because there's actually a second step here. And this is going to explain what we have going on with linguistic theft. And it would be really helpful if y'all either nod or you shake if you're getting this or you're not getting this, because I know that these are like super sophisticated diagrams here. Yeah, you're right. So let's look at identity. So remember, if Satan's going against the identity of God and identity of man, let's just talk about identity itself. There are two things that you desperately need in order to have a correct identity. The first one is truth, and the next one is words. You cannot have a true identity unless you believe in the concept of truth. And you cannot convey a true identity unless you can use words. So I'm going to say that again. In order to have true identity, you have to have the concept of truth. In order to convey identity, you have to use words. So remember, if the goal is messing with the identity of God and identity of man in order to erase the gospel, he's going to take it one step further. He's going to say, let's just attack identity itself. Let's get rid of truth. We saw this happen. And we talk about in the Mama Bear book, the three main epochs of philosophical history, which were pre-modern, modern, and postmodern. So the pre-modern would be where people believe the way that I got truth is through God or the gods or the priests who are over them. And this wasn't just the Judeo-Christian priests and stuff. This was, could have been the shaman. Whoever the religious figure was, that's who they went for. Moving into the scientific revolution, they said, well, there's been so many religious wars. This is just dumb. We think the way that truth is discovered is through man's natural reasoning ability and the scientific method, because when the scientific revolution happened, that was everything. This is going to solve all the world's problems. Everybody's going to agree. So truth went from being a domain of God to a domain of man. Man basically took the throne of God and we said, this is how we find truth. Now move step forward one more. And, of course, they thought this was going to solve all their problems. But what they found was, you know what? People were still fighting. Scientists were disagreeing. Some studies showed this and some studies showed the opposite. So apparently science wasn't going to solve all our problems. And people got very disillusioned. And so this is where postmodernism comes in, which started probably around the 60s, I think. It might have been earlier. Postmodernism says that even if there is truth, we can't know it. So now we have taken truth out of, not only does truth not come from God, well, now we're going to say just ultimate truth. Maybe we can get some of it in science, but ultimately we just can't know. And so we have knocked out this idea that truth exists. So if we look at our diagram here, if we knocked out truth, then we've knocked out half the equation to have a true identity. Well, the next thing that we have going on, and this also, I thought this was more new than it is. Apparently this also started kind of in the 60s and 70s. I'm reading all sorts of stuff, is we are taking out words, because when we take out words, we take out identity. This is how Satan is attacking right now. He's saying truth doesn't exist. And even if it does, I'm going to change the words that you would actually use to know truth. And I'm going to change their definition. So we knock out the ability to have a true identity. And again, these were the identities that we were trying to establish: the correct identity of mankind, the correct identity of God. This knocks out gospel. And so he's going back several steps. The way we're going to get this out is to destroy words, to destroy the logos. So I want to talk about just, we're going to have a couple of different quotes here that illustrate what's going on. Holly Ordway says in her book, Apologetics and the Imagination, once language becomes routinely distorted, it becomes increasingly easy to justify and promote evil, while at the same time hiding behind positive words. So nobody is usually going to admit that they are promoting evil. What they always think they're doing is they're crusading for the greater good. People who are doing evil are fairly uncommitted to, having to actually follow it through. It's, but there are no ends to which someone will go if they think they are championing for the greater good. And so if we can distort words to make someone think they're championing for the greater good, then you have a more powerful warrior and ally than you could have ever had. Think about Braveheart. one man defending his home is worth more than 10 hired soldiers. Or maybe that was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I can't remember. One of those two. So yeah, we're hiding behind positive words. Now, I want to introduce you to a book here called Rules for Radicals. And I would like you to raise your hand if you have heard of this book. No, okay, one person. In person, Monica, because y'all just heard me talk about it in the last one. And this is written by Saul Alinsky. And Saul Alinsky was he calls himself a community organizer, which means that he's just trying to make things happen. It's got very strong Marxist ties, although he says, well, we're not exactly like the communists. It's very, very Marxist. He was really in his heyday when Barack Obama was growing up in Chicago, because he was also from Chicago. Hillary Clinton did her dissertation on him, or either her thesis or her dissertation. But I just want to read real quick who he dedicates this book to at the very beginning here. Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical, the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. So he basically dedicates this book to Satan at the very beginning, which of course all the best books start out with, dedication to Satan. This book is like a manual for a lot of the things that you see going on. And I want to show you some of the quotes from here that really illustrate where linguistic theft is coming from. So these are direct quotes. The 10th rule of ethics and means is that you do what you can with what you have and clothe it in moral garments. All effective means require the passport of morality. So he is writing this for in America, where the Judeo-Christian view has been very long established here. And so he is banking on the fact that most people have a commitment to morality. And he's not even saying in this quote, we need to be moral. He's saying whatever you're doing, you have to clothe it in moral arguments. And this is how you get people to agree with you when they would normally not agree with you. That's on page 36 and 44. It's in the same chapter, but they work better together. So the next one, the 11th rule, he goes through all these rules of ethics and means, is that goals should be phrased in general terms like liberty, equality, fraternity. And what we're seeing happen right now is we're going to go over which words are being used. This is still happening, but it's being phrased in terms of oppression, rights, equality, and justice. These are things that are very difficult to quantify. And again, these are our categorical words, not our informative words. And so he's saying you need to purposely be vague, because if you say what you're actually trying to do, then people might reject the idea. If you use it in terms where they already agree, who doesn't agree with liberty and equality? And fraternity is like brotherhood, but even that fraternity should be a sign that that's Marxist right there. Next, he says, once you organize people around something is commonly agreed upon as pollution, then an organized people is on the move. From there, it's a short and natural step to political pollution, to Pentagon pollution. What he's describing in this passage is the war with Vietnam. So there were some people that were saying, yes, this is a justified war for Vietnam, and other people who are saying, no, it's not justified. So if you wanted to get people organized against the war on Vietnam, you don't come out saying we need to be against the war on Vietnam. That's trying to directly change someone's viewpoint. He says that's very hard to do. What you do is you find something that they can agree on, and something that's going to make you look like a fool, basically, if you disagree. So pollution is what he starts with. Who's going to say I'm pro-pollution? Like, nobody's going to say that. This is banking on the idea that people know that pollution's bad. And basically that's the carrot that you dangle, the little Pied Piper, coming, that gets all these people following. And then as they're following, then we're going to change that definition of pollution. Now we're talking about political pollution. That's very much a different thing from actual pollution. And then Pentagon pollution. Now we're moving towards going against your government. Well, you have never been able to convince this mob to go against their government unless you had already organized them around something that they agreed with. And this is what we see happening in culture, is that people are being organized around the idea of equality, of fighting against oppression, all the things that we would say. And now they're changing it. I saw this happen during the Women's March several years ago. I guess it was right after Trump got elected. There was a Women's March that I knew some people that even participated in. And if you looked at their website, in fact, you can go onto the Mama Bear blog and it says, so you march for women this weekend. Here's 8 things you probably didn't know you were marching for. And it goes from everything from sex workers' rights to taking away guns from police force, to reducing police force, to the Dakota pipeline. I mean, what do those things have to do with women? Nothing. But once they had people surrounded and people organized around something like women's rights, which is a good thing, now they can say, look at all these people who are against all these other things. You see Black Lives Matter doing this as well, that it starts out with something that's very, very legitimate, that we do still have racism going on in our culture. But if it's interesting, they just took this off their website. One of the things that they had on our About Us section, on our core beliefs, was the disruption of the nuclear family. I mean, if we were going to say one thing that in the Black is destroying the Black community, that would be the absence of fathers. But according to Marxist principles, the nuclear family teaches you how to obey authoritarian structures, and Marxists don't like authoritarian structures. So in order to keep people from being primed for this authoritarian structure, you needed to destroy the family. But again, they're starting out with, if you won't say Black Lives Matter, then that means you're a racist. It's like, why won't you say Black Lives Matter? Well, because there's other things that are brought into that have nothing to do with Black lives. But again, this is a very purposeful thing that is taught by Saul Alinsky. You organize people around something they already agree with. In this one, we're going to see what's happening in our culture right now. Before men can act, an issue must be polarized. Men will act when they are convinced that their cause is 100% on the side of the angels and that the opposition are 100% on the side of the devil. He knows that there can be no action until issues are polarized to this degree. So this is another reason for using the linguistic theft, is if you can make your opponent look like they are just from the absolute devil, then you can actually win the cause. And now let's bring it back to what's going on with our kids. Let me see, I'm gonna unshare for a second. Let's go back to think about what's going on with our kids. If you look at, we talked in the previous section about cancel culture, that when I was young, and probably when a lot of y'all were in school, cancel culture was all about having too big of a nose, being too fat, too thin, frizzy hair, socially awkward, all those things. It's basically encapsulated in, there's something about you that I don't like, and therefore I'm going to reject you. And that itself is hard enough. But if we look at this, what he's talking about, that before you can have an action, people have to be 100% polarized, thinking that they're the side of the angels and the other people are the side of the devils. The cancel culture that our kids are going through right now is not, I don't like you. It's, you are evil and must be destroyed. That's an entirely different kind of pressure that I cannot even imagine. And yeah, a lot of y'all are in Portland, so you've seen this stuff that's going on. Just the Trump mania. I had a mama bear when we were talking about cancel culture, and she was saying how number one, her kids went through this, that one of her children was in theater, and that when it came out that he was a Christian, they pestered him and pestered him, pestered him until he admitted that, yeah, the Bible teaches that same-sex relationships are wrong. And then they all just canceled him. You are evil. You are the one that's making gay kids commit suicide. It's people like you that are the oppressors. You know, you are evil and you gone. And this is why you also see such righteous indignation and people willing to do whatever means are necessary, because the book, this actually teaches basically the ends justify the means, that if it's a good turnout, whatever you have to do to make it happen is good. And then once you've convinced that men are acting for the greater good, that they're 100% on the side of the angels, there's nothing they won't do and nothing that they won't justify. Let's see. So we're going to talk about some of the common thefted words. We have a lot of these in the Mama Bear book. And so let's see how much time I have. I'm probably gonna breeze through some of these. The concept of love, like this is probably one of the ones you see everywhere. You see love is love. And what do they mean by love is love? Excuse me. They mean that basically they've equated love to sex, and any kind of sex is good. So love is love means sex, any kind of sex is fine. But what they're going to be saying to your kids is, when you say that this is not okay, that's unloving. Your God said to love. So why aren't you loving like Jesus did? Jesus went to the outcasts. These are the people who have been outcasted in our society. If you followed Christianity, you'd follow your own scriptures and you would love them like Jesus did. How's a 12-year-old going to respond to that? Oh, golly, they're right. I am supposed to love. This is what love means. Oh, okay. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. The next one is truth. And the phrase that drives me nuts is, because it's never supposed to have a possessive pronoun in front of it, is my truth, his truth, their truth. It's like truth has been taken from ultimate and it's been turned into everybody can have their own versions. And I remember even in high school, one of our Bible study leaders said, everybody has a right to their own opinion, but not to their own truth. Truth is but one. Tolerance is another big one. That tolerance, the classic definition of tolerance, if you look at most dictionaries, at least from earlier, I always encourage people to go to older dictionaries because they're like literally changing the dictionary by the day right now. Tolerance is to live in peace with someone despite disagreement. So what do you have to have in order for tolerance to exist? You have to have disagreement. But what the kids are being told is, if you disagree, that's intolerant. Let's see. Justice and equality. If there is anything that you want to get people, everything is being phrased in terms of justice and equality. So again, I hate to keep harping on abortion, but abortion is called reproductive justice. Which again, you might ask someone, oh, what do you mean by justice? Or marriage equality. Yeah, anything you phrase in terms of justice and equality, if you are against it, you are immediately for injustice and inequality, which we have all, we've got a pretty recent history, shall we say, of real injustice and real inequality within our Black community and just communities of color in general. That's not that long ago. So this is already what people think of injustice and inequality. So what they can do is anything they want to make you accept, phrase it in those terms, because you're going to eventually decide or discover that you're on the wrong side of history, just like we did back in the 60s with the civil rights. Now I'm going to share my screen for this one. Violence. This is one of the ones that, oops, that's not, this is one of the ones that's a pretty big deal right now. And I'm going to share some quotes from this. So violence and oppression. I'm going to actually, I think I have slides for both of those. This idea the violence is happening. Everybody has a concept that violence is bad, really, right? No one's going to say, oh, I think we should have violence. So the book here, the book here, Unjust, Social Justice and the Unmaking of America by Noah Rothman. I really recommend this. He does a really good job with explaining the social justice movement, which I want to say there's some people who call themselves social justice warriors that are doing so with right motives. And again, this is where you can say there's probably right motives. The people think that they're on the side of the angels here. But the way that they're accomplishing it is they're being manipulated badly. And so, but this is what's happened to the word violence. It is increasingly common to hear social justice activists equate discomfiting, and yes, that's a word, I looked it up, I thought it was a typo, discomfiting or objectionable speech with acts of violence, and not just in a metaphorical sense. Those activists are just as liable to view reactionary activities, including public disturbances, property destruction, and even the physical harassment of their opponents as alternative forms of expression. Since they conflate offensive speech and violence, a violent response to speech isn't just reasonable, it's necessary. It's practically self-defense. I'll let that sink in for a second. So think about what they're saying is that if you perpetrate violence on me, then it is absolutely okay for me to respond in violence. Violent, someone, like, of course, if someone punches me, I might swing back. I'd probably fall to the ground and cry. If someone tried to punch my husband, he'd probably punch back, or most people would. That would be kind of this tit for tat. But what they're saying is if you have objectionable speech, that's the same thing as violence. I'm gonna share real quick because I talk with my hands. Stop sharing. Okay, so this is the objectionable speech that you did towards me. This is me reacting violently. These two things are equal according to this definition of violence. And this is what we see happening, golly, with all the protest, but I'm not even calling the protests, the riots that we have going on. You also see it for whenever you have a conservative speaker who's been invited to a campus, that they have to have police coming to protect, because they will, anyone who is wanting to go hear the speaker can be physically punched and attacked. If you go out to one of a lot of the riots, did anyone see the thing that happened where there was this woman sitting at a restaurant and this mob was coming up to her saying, "Raise your hand for justice." And she was going, "What do you mean? What am I raising my hand for?" She didn't want to do something when she didn't know what it was. They responded in violence. And so at this point, I think this is happening after Noah wrote this book. We don't just have offensive speech being labeled as violence. Think about the phrase, if you've seen this, raise your hand if you've heard the phrase, "Silence is violence." Our kids are not even having the opportunity to not say anything anymore. An example I gave in the last talk was a woman's daughter was told it's going to be wear orange for LGBT Day. So she knows that if her daughter wears orange, that means that it's telling everybody I support the LGBT agenda. If her daughter doesn't wear orange, the kids are going to say, "You're the hateful bully, you're the bigot, intolerant person, the homophobic who is causing all these kids to commit suicide." And at that point, she didn't wear orange. They would probably consider a violent response justified. Remember, it's not just reasonable, it's practically self-defense. Silence is violence. We've just now redefined the word violence. Let's see. So I want to give you kind of this idea that I can only show this. I'll show this for a second, so that you can see we don't have time to go through all this. This is actually being circulated out around, not only on the internet, this is being taught in college classrooms, and it's being taught in a soft way to basically kids in a lot of schools. And this is what was called intersectionality, where it's not just one group against another, that you have different layers. But I want you to notice down here, so it says matrix of oppression. When it says privileged or social groups, and the other one is oppressed social groups, what they're teaching is the privileged social group is the oppressor. It's not that you don't even have to do anything to be an oppressor. You just have to be in this category. So look at all our categories here. White people, biological men, gender conforming biological men and women, heterosexual people, rich upper class people, temporarily able-bodied people. Basically, if you don't have a disability, then you're privileged and you can be the oppressor. Protestants, guess what? That's all of us. Christians are the oppressor. And then adults, we're actually going to start seeing this coming in. I have seen does anyone know what NAMBLA is? Raise your hand if you know what NAMBLA is. Yeah, it's concerning. It's the North American Man-Boy Love Association. And when you see people starting to champion for pedophile, I guarantee you what they're going to be doing is they're going to be championing for children's rights. They're championing for children's rights to do what they want with their own bodies, because that's what they are doing on the NAMBLA site right now. And the way that they're paving the way for that is with the transgender movement. If a 6-year-old can decide what gender they are, if they have the ability to decide there, then they have the ability to decide if they want to be in a sexual relationship or not. So the adults are the oppressors, telling your kids what to do, punishing them. You're treating them like objects, like a dog. Stop it. That's basically what they're saying. And all of this is by changing the word oppression. Finally, some of our, let's see, how much time do I have? Oops, got like, hold on. Okay, about 7 minutes. this one's not in the book, but I realized that the word Jesus is one of the most probably linguistically thefted words right now, because people all want to have a Jesus that tells them, they want a Jesus that loves the oppressed, which is great. We have a Jesus that loves the oppressed, but their definition of love and their definition of oppressed means that he accepts anybody for what they do. He doesn't want to tell you that what you do is wrong. And basically that's the Jesus that we want to follow. And if we preach Christ of the Bible, that's offensive. So basically people have redefined who Jesus is, and they are just tossing the Bible out left and right. In fact, the Mama Bear book, we have a chapter on progressive Christianity. People within the church, or who claim to be within the church, are themselves doing this. The next one is the word harm. And I didn't have that one originally in the book. I want to show you this book that I'm using for research on the book that I'm currently writing right now. It's called Shameless by Nadia Bolz-Weber. She is I think a Lutheran minister. And she is so against what happened with purity culture back in the 90s that she actually had a campaign for people to send their purity rings from the purity culture in the 90s. And she had it grafted into a golden vagina, which she then presented to, oh golly, who's the Gloria Steinem as a gift. It's all over. If you well, you probably don't want to Google Nadia Bolz-Weber vagina, but if you do that, you can find the picture of her presenting this to Gloria Steinem. She uses the word harm 32 times in this book, which is approximately once every 6 pages. And so, oh, I had it open, shoot, and I closed it. Hold on, let me find, oh, I remember, here it is. It's at the beginning. I'm so sorry, I thought I had this in the presentation. Basically, she's arguing for a new Christian sexual ethic. She's claiming to be a Christian, and she's saying that we need a new sexual ethic. She says consent and mutuality are that which should constitute a baseline sexual ethic. And basically, anybody who's preaching something other than that is doing harm. Okay, I can't find it. The word harm is used over and over again for teaching biblical sexuality. It is harmful to people. And you don't only see this with her, you see this with people like Jen Hatmaker, who preaches this as well. We have a whole podcast where Jen Hatmaker's daughter comes out as gay, and they're talking. And the daughter says that she came across a book when her parents were studying homosexuality and trying to decide where they landed on it. She picked this book, and she said it was written by a pastor who didn't know where he stood yet, but he was so loving, and you could tell he was so committed, and he went verse by verse and finally came to the decision that, yeah, homosexuality is a sin. And she said that it just absolutely destroyed her. And she was laying on the ground and she was crying because basically she thought this meant she couldn't be a child of God. And she was telling pastors, you need to know that these people are in your church and you are doing harm. And her mother literally responds. She said, yeah, that is the worst. And I used to be like that. You know, I love the gay people in my life, but I wasn't affirming that is even more harmful. It would be better if you were openly homophobic. So this idea of even teaching that homosexuality is a sin is so harmful that it's the worst cruelty of all. That's the phrase that she used. It's the worst cruelty. It would be better if they were openly homophobic. So the word harm, again, is being co-opted. And then finally, well, let me see if I can skip ahead. Authentic. And we talk about that one in the book. This idea of authentic means that you're just honest about where you are, but in being honest, because basically it's a reaction against this idea of what we call here in Pella, we have a very Dutch population here, and it's called a Dutch front. Dutch fronts were when during the war, there's stuff that had like been bombed and it was awful and there was no storefronts. So what they did is they fixed up the storefronts so that they looked all nice, but behind it was just completely rubble. And so, as a Christian nation, we did probably have that at one point. We didn't discuss the sins that we were struggling with. Everything's, perfect at home. Kids are good. Husband's good. Behind the scenes, everything's falling apart, but we're going to present it like it's not. So the word authentic was used to say, you know what, you need to bring your struggles and be who you are. And that is actually a good kind of authenticity. However, the word authentic has been hijacked. That basically, if you are struggling, if you are pursuing holiness, you're not being authentic. Basically, you're trying to be more perfect than everybody else. And so it's become this Trojan horse for rebellion. As long as you're being authentic to present your struggles and to actually struggle, that's a great definition of authentic. If you're using authentic to mean that I'm not going to go against my natural inclinations, I'm sorry, our sin natures direct us towards sin. That's the way that we were made. And Christian life is meant to be inauthentic in the sense that we are constantly struggling against that which is natural. So then finally, like now that we know some of these words that are being stolen, how do we prepare our kids? And I think the first thing we can do is we can present them with the concept of the category words and information, like actual information. So there's certain words like running. If someone says someone is running, there's really only one definition of that. You know what's doing. That's an action word. That's information. Now, when you have the buzzwords here, like justice and equality, those are categorical words that someone is saying this situation that's happening over here qualifies as injustice. It qualifies as inequality. So you teach them to listen for these words. And in fact, when you are watching television with them, if you can put it on pause, you hear someone say something, put it on pause and say, did they give us information or did they just categorize something? And let them see, oh, you're right, that's a category word. They have not presented me information. I've actually had some people like that I presented to on this, that one of them was a college educated, he was a guy that was in college, and I presented a scenario, the one about the Florida, saying, you know, racism has entered the selection process for the pastor. And I asked them, you know, was that information or is it categorical? And he said, and this guy said, oh, I think it's information. Which that's exactly what it's intended to do. It's intended to make you think that they're giving you information when they're not. If we can train our kids to spot these, that is one of the best ways to keep them from falling prey to it. And one of my mama bears had this really great idea that she emailed me, that after reading the book, she created what she called as a buzzwords board, and it's up in their house. And I was like, God bless you. I'm putting this into the, as a suggestion into the study guide that's coming out in February, that they have a buzzwords board that has oppression, truth, you know, love, all the different words. And every time they find a new one, they put it in there. It's the category words that appeal to people's morality. Because remember when we talked about Saul Alinsky, everything has to have the passport of morality. So what are these moral words that people are using? And every time they hear one of the buzzwords, they ask, what's actually going on? That is going to teach your kids to have their ears pricked up for when people are trying to pretend that they're giving them information, but they're not. Or when they're trying to manipulate them into believing something that they might normally not agree with. And how to ask those questions. What do you mean by oppression? What do you mean by tolerance? What do you mean by fair? When you say Jesus, like describe what that looks like. What do you mean by harm? They start recognizing these words, and it will allow them to engage in dialogue and not to be taken captive by these bad ideas. So finally, I'm just going to give a quick summary of what we talked about. Linguistic theft, purposefully hijacking words, changing their definitions, and then using those same words as tools of propaganda. We talked about how it worked, that it stops a discussion in its tracks, that it compels people to act without thinking through the issue. It blurs the details. It doesn't give you information. It vilifies the opposing viewpoint, and it turns a negative into a positive. It's trying to make you agree with something that you wouldn't normally agree. The reason why I believe that's happening is because Satan hates the gospel. He does not want man and God to be in right relationship. So he's distorting the image of God, and he's distorting the image of man through distorting their identities. But the way he distorts their identities is he goes through the two things that comprise identity: truth and words. We've seen truth being attacked, and we're seeing words being attacked. And how to prepare your kids: basically just telling them this is what's going on. I find that it's incredibly helpful when you know someone's manipulating you to see how they're manipulating you. And at that point, basically everybody's natural instinct is going to cross their arms and be like, you're not going to fool me again. And that's an empowered child. So that is how to empower your children to withstand linguistic theft. And that is the end of our presentation. So if we have any questions. Oop, you're on mute, Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Hillary. We have a few questions in the chat,
Okay.
and I think that it looks like there's still room for more if you have some.
Feel free. Yeah, we got plenty of time. I made sure we've got.
So Bruce and Monica are asking about what study guide were you referring to? And where can
Oh,
they
so yeah, the Mama Bear Apologetics Study Guide is coming out in February. So you can pre-order it right now. And I worked really hard to make this not something where you're just regurgitating, like, you know, I said this in the book, say it again. And you're like, okay, I'll copy down what it says. I tried to give a lot of scenarios that really make you think through some of the concepts. So it's, I'm excited for people to get it. But yeah, it comes out in February.
Okay. And then another question, do you see linguistic theft as different from the logical fallacy of equivocation? This is from Don Heberly.
I actually, I think in the book, I even say that, let's see, where is it? Too many books on my thing. Yeah. Oh, here it is. That it actually is a form of the equivocation, but I didn't want to go into it. It does more than equivocation. So it's not completely the same thing, but yeah, let's see. What did I say? Maybe that got edited out. I said it's especially virulent form of the equivocation fallacy. So yes, good call, good catch.
Okay. And Kathy Schmidt asks, she says, I also see Christian symbols being stolen, like the rainbow. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that that this is what Satan does. He is trying to basically, he's trying to take everything that God has promised. A lot of times it's with his promises. So we're going to see this with the rainbow, because that was meant to be a symbol to us from God. But something that my pastor talked about like a year or two ago, was after God made the promise to Abraham that from your seed is going to be this great nation. Twice after that, like the first time before he had slept with and created Ishmael, not slept with Ishmael, you know what I mean. When they're traveling, his wife gets taken by a king, and he's like, say that you're my sister. It happens twice. And it's like, you see this happening, like God gave a promise and Satan is immediately trying to thwart that promise by getting her pregnant by someone else, just because God had said through Abraham will I bless the many nations. So I think when we see things that are either a symbol from God or a promise of God, that Satan is actively saying, okay, that's my next target. So I agree. Yes.